Job burnout is a special type of work-related stress, a state of physical or emotional exhaustion that also involves a sense of reduced accomplishment and loss of personal identity. This is how the Mayo Clinic breaks down and defines burnout at work. It's real. Burnout is real. It's real for us as leaders and our teams. But if we haven't been through it ourselves, it can be harder to relate to, support, and work to address. And we have to address it for the health of our organization and our employees. My guest today has been through it. Surprised the hell out of him too. And now he's working to help organizations make sure their teams, your teams, don't get to the point where burnout is a problem. And it can be a problem. It can impact illness. It can impact retention. It can impact depressive disorders. So we're going to get into it today on how we all can do a better job at addressing burnout. But first, we have to know what it looks like and feels like. Hold on. Welcome to Relationships at Work, the leadership guide to creating a workplace we love. I'm Russel. I'm your host for the show. I'm a communications nerd and a leadership nerd. That's nerd times 2, with a couple of decades of experience in both those areas. Also, a heap of curiosity on how we can make the workplace a better place to work. This show is a great resource for that. I hope you're well. I just got back from Ottawa. I'd never been before. For those who don't know, Ottawa is Canada's capital. Usually people think it's Toronto, but it is not. I've never been. Really enjoyed myself. Walking and biking and eating and more biking. My shame bracelet, you may call it an Apple Watch. I call it my shame bracelet because it just tells me all the things I'm not doing. It was getting me into the 15,000, 20,000 steps a day. So my body is sore. But I had so much fun. I had a blast. One of my favorite parts was actually the Canadian Museum of History. It's the most popular museum in all of the land. It's a lot. It is a lot. And usually when I get to museums that have lots of writing, I'm not great. I gloss over a lot of it. I'm that person that goes, okay, I get it. I get the gist. Moving on. Not this time around. Me and my partner were there for about, 5 hours? Yeah, 5 hours sounds about right. So much information. I read a lot, as much as I could take in, to the point at the end where I'm like, I can't put anything more in my brain. I can't do this anymore. But the reason I'm talking about this, the reason I'm talking about traveling and Ottawa and consuming all this information is that it's so important to use your brain for other things besides work. Maybe it's escaping with a movie or a book, or traveling to a place you've never been, or maybe even find familiar, comforting, experiencing something that brings you excitement, joy, whatever it is, it's personalized to you. But the important thing is work is not a part of your brain function in those moments. Because truthfully, we can't be good at work if we're not good at home, if we're not good out in the world. There's no balance we're talking about work and life here, but there is overlap of impact. If something's not great in one area, it's not going to be great in another. And if one is all-encompassing, like work can sometimes be, that's really not good. For me, it actually helps me think differently when I go back to work. Or maybe it helps me connect dots that I didn't even notice before, especially in my creativity, especially in my sharing of information like this show itself. Being away from it actually benefits the work, which I can, of course, share with you. I hope you get a chance to break away from your work, whenever it might be. It doesn't have to be during the summer. It doesn't have to be over the Christmas holidays. Whenever you need the time and you can take it, take it. And how's that for a great segue? My radio training is kicking in here. Our topic today, we're revisiting burnout. This episode was originally shared late last year, late 2022, and it resonated so strongly with you and for me that I wanted to highlight it again. Well-being consultant and performance coach James Pickles was hit hard by burnout. Just a couple of years ago, actually, and debilitatingly so. His story it's a relatable one, especially for those who focus so much on work and doing the next thing and doing the next thing and want to being that rock star, but they might not have that self-awareness and the damage they could be causing their own mental health and possibly even their families when they're taking all that home. I love how vulnerable James is in telling his story. It's there to help us do better. He's a cautionary tale, but he's at a place now where he wants us to do better. And by listening to him, I hope it's relatable to you, and I hope it helps you understand how you could be better as a leader and how you can support your teams and create a culture that addresses burnout and doesn't just allow it to happen. Let's talk with James. And on the show today, we have James Pickles, and here's why he is awesome. He's a mental health advocate and motivational speaker. He's the executive coach for James Pickles Coaching, which helps clients with clarity, consciousness, and confidence. I'm the one that actually put the 3 C's together. Not bad, eh? An associate mindset coach at Matthew Syed Consulting with a focus on growth mindset and performance. And he's sitting on more than 20 years of experience in sales and management roles. And he has a tale to tell that I think anybody listening will relate to and learn from. Hi, James.
Russell, hello. Good morning for you. Good afternoon for me.
The beauty of a time change where I'm fueled by coffee and you're just getting into the groove through the day. Nice. Hopefully the tempo works for us in our conversation.
Yeah, let's see.
Let's see how it goes, or it, crash and burns. So first out of the gate, which is, what's your best or worst employee experience? Can you tell us a story where it sort of still resonates with you, good or bad?
Yeah, I can. I'm gonna zoom out then zoom in, if that's all right. So,
Of course.
and maybe the context is interesting because the reason that I became a mental health advocate and a performance coach and growth mindset person and deliver talks to people is because off the back of being really, really good at selling things, being a sales director, off the back of my most successful professional run ever, out of nowhere, seemingly, I crashed and burned and had a really acute mental and physical breakdown, which manifested as burnout, but really huge panic attack for about 10 days, just because one of my colleagues, after a trade show in a pub, asked me how I was. And I told her that I was fine, great, terrific. All of the things that you say, because it's not really a question anyway, or certainly not one that people really want to know the answer to. The rules are somebody goes, how are you? And you say, fine, thanks, how are you? And they say, fine, thanks. And then you move on. But she decided not to take me at face value that day. And when I went, fine, terrific, brilliant, she went, are you sure? Because you don't seem yourself. How are you really? Which took me by surprise. And I was so knackered and strung out from working super hard to hit ever more stretching targets that I found myself admitting to her and to myself simultaneously that no, I'm not fine. This is too hard. I can't do it anymore. And what happened next was quite a lot of sobbing in front of her, my boss, the head of Europe, and the most senior guy on my sales team, and another senior director, 6 or 8 people in my peer group at work who I'd spent 10 years trying to impress and maintain my, to say professional brand sounds horribly pompous, but I had a reputation to uphold. So to collapse in front of them in an uncontrollable way in public was deeply alarming. So I had burnout, and that saw me off sick for 9 months. I spent 9 months unable to function well enough to work, but also for several of those months unable to function as a person, or as a husband or a father or a brother or a son or an uncle, unable to function at all. So that's the zoom out bit, Russell. So some might say that's the best employee, not the best employee experience I've ever had, the worst, in fact, having terrible, uncontrollable burnout in public. But the worst and best experiences were simultaneously with HR whilst I was off. And the best was, in the round, that my employer at that time, repeatedly told me to take as much time as I needed, and that they had my back, and that they would pay my salary until I was ready to come back. Pretty cool. The best was when a senior HR person, when I was trying to come back too soon, because I wanted to go back to work, at least on paper, because I was worried they were going to stop paying me at any point. So I tried to come back too soon for what I thought were the right reasons, but as it turns out, they were absolutely the wrong reasons. Tried to come back, agreed to a new job role, because I decided to quit being a sales director, because I thought, and I'm not being flippant, I thought I'll die if I go back to that. So we created a new role, and I was trying to come back to it. And the HR person that I was dealing with, to whom I'll be forever grateful, saw through my thin veil of comfort and confidence and didn't believe me. And basically, after a call in which we'd agreed a bunch of criteria and stuff, kind of discreetly called me up after and went, "I'm not sure you are ready. I think you might be rushing back to please us," or words to that effect. So how about we just park it for another couple of weeks and let's just see where we are in a couple of weeks. And I was so relieved, Russell, that she'd given me permission not to come back, even though it was my idea. That I suddenly noticed I'd spent all day feeling like I was going to puke at the prospect of going back, and her calling me up saying, "And you don't have to," dissipated that nauseous feeling that sat somewhere above my stomach and beneath my heart. And it just went. She took it away. Brilliant piece of empathy and clarity that she exhibited. Let me off the hook. And therein also lies the worst of pretty bad experience with HR too. So let me zoom forward ever so slightly. This all happened in 2019, by the way, so not even very long ago. I spent most of 2019 off sick. But when I did go back, and I did, in a new role, mostly because I was terribly afraid of being unemployable by anyone else ever. So I went back to a better the devil you know kind of setup in a different job, in a phased return. Now, I didn't really know what that was, but we had sat together and decided that it meant that I would start on the 1st, 2nd or 3rd of January, whatever the first working day was, can't remember. And that I would start doing 2 hours a week. And the following week I might do 3 hours. And the week after that I might do 4. And that might turn into a half a day a week. And then after that I'd build it up into 2 half days a week, and so on. You see where the trajectory of that is going. And that it would take 3 months. And at the end of 3 months, I'd be back up to full time. And in my total lack of wisdom, I accepted that as being logical and fair, and it did make sense. I was like, okay, great. I'll start a little bit here, and then I'm going to build up over time until I end up back at full time, and we'll take 3 months to do it. I thought that'd be all right. I also thought it would be linear progression, like the graph would be nice and straight. With my yellow pencil, I don't know if we can use the video or not, I'm holding up a yellow pencil at 45 degrees to represent my progress. And at no point did anybody say, that is an imaginary graph, and just because you feel okay one week doesn't mean you'll feel okay the next, or to the same extent. Actually, the graph would look like a series of really big peaks and really deep troughs. So I found, Russell, that I was struggling with my phased return. So I emailed HR. The previous person that was so cleverly had prevented me from coming back before had since left, unfortunately. So I dealt with somebody else. And I emailed HR and said, I'm finding this really difficult, this phase return. It's much harder than I thought. And you did say throughout that if there's anything that I needed, I should get in touch. So here I am getting in touch. It's too hard. I can't do it by myself. I need some more support, please. And HR's response, I'm paraphrasing, but it was a succinct little email basically saying, everyone's different. There's no simple solution. So just do your best. Work it out between yourselves. So having had the courage to ask for help, which was no mean feat to begin with, given how bad I was feeling, to ask for help and then be told to sort it out by yourself, suffice to say, wasn't a very helpful thing to happen. And actually, it just told me that I was, in fact, on my own, and that all those offers of help and support were meaningless and tokenism, and that they weren't interested really, so I should just get on with it. Set me back considerably, that. I wasn't asking for a solution, I was just asking for some support, and as it turns out, there wasn't any available from the very department that should be best placed to provide it.
Now, before we get any further, I want to go back. I want to go back to that moment where you're in that pub and you're showing your vulnerability. You are being honest and open and admitting that you're not okay. What was the reaction to your reaction in that moment with your peers around you, the colleague that had asked that question? What was the immediate fallout in the room?
Yeah, it's a good question, Russell, because I've thought about it a lot. What was the immediate reaction? They were absolutely astonished to see me unravel like that. Bearing in mind that there were six or eight people there, but only one of them had asked the question. I was sat right next to her. So the question was not clear to everybody else. We're having private conversation in a public place. But my reaction to it was far from private. So the first response was shock and concern. People going, "What's going on here? What's the matter with James? What's happening?" As I was busily sobbing with snot coming out my nose and a blotchy red face and making funny hiccuping sounds and visibly distressed. So initially they were shocked in a kind of, what's happening? What is this emergency that's unfolding? And reflecting on it earlier before this call today with you, I was wondering, best, worst. And definitely in the best camp was a bunch of people who I'd worked really closely with for some of them 8, 9, 10 years. Like I knew these people really well in a work context and socially as well. Plenty of client entertainment and drinks out and stuff like that. And what they didn't do was awkwardly shy away. They didn't try and remove themselves rapidly from this embarrassing situation. Bearing in mind that most of what I felt at the time was fear and shame. Fear that I couldn't stop it, fear of the judgment that I'd receive, shame at the way that I was displaying, like unraveling in front of them, what I thought then and definitely don't think now, shame that I was showing such weakness and fallibility where I should be displaying strength and control. And they didn't shy away from it. In fact, they leaned in to it with kindness and empathy and concern, and they just wanted to help rather than bugger off. And actually, they did as best they could in those situations, but a little bit limited as to what help looked like. What help could they tangibly provide? And we're in a pub, so the obvious sort of help to provide is to get me some tissues to dry the tears and wipe the snot off my face, and then go and get me some more drinks. And then we all had drinks and got smashed. So sort of I like kind of okay at the time, but sort of ironic because as it turns out, I've been self-medicating with alcohol for a good long while to cope with stress. So almost added a bit more fuel to the fire there. But yeah, they helped with their presence.
Right.
They helped by listening and then empathizing. But the most profound helpful thing that they did, apart from just genuine human kindness and showing that they also are not immune to difficulties in life or stress. So they showed themselves as humans, fellow humans. So we shocked off the armor, the clothing of corporate existence, and everybody just showed their true selves and shared with me their attention and their empathy. But they also shared, not everybody, because not everybody has a story to share, but people shared that they too had had a really shitty time and that they also had broken down and that they had needed some help. And that's where my journey towards therapy began, actually, because these people who I had looked up to, like role models in several of those cases, showed that they needed help too sometimes, and that help's helpful, and that therapy was a really good route for them. And even more surprising, firstly, I fell off my chair with surprise that these people had ever needed therapy anyway. but then admitted that they continue to go back to therapy from time to time because it's just really helpful. Like it's different in North America, perhaps, where therapy is a bit more of a normal part of the fabric of life. But in London and the UK, it's almost like only broken weirdos have therapy, and so that's why I was so. I'm not saying that is true, by the way.
No, it's just the stigma. Just the stigma. Let's be
That's a
clear.
figure. It's super clear on that. So it's amazing because I completely redefined for me what support looked like.
You did mention that you had started self-medicated, I guess, due to the stress and the job itself. In hindsight, now looking back a couple years later, were there any other red flags or warning signs that you can, acknowledge now that led you to that moment in the pub?
I get asked that question quite a lot, Russell. It's a great question. What were the signs? What signs did you spot? What were you aware of before that led up to it? Was it avoidable? How could you do it differently in hindsight? All of those things. Oh, and were the signs obvious? So that's usually the addition to that. And it's a funny one because in hindsight, there were shitloads of signs. There were loads of them. Drinking tons of booze routinely with people or by myself and getting home late and a bit drunk nearly every day was a glaringly obvious sign now, but it wasn't obvious then because I didn't suddenly overnight drink 5 days a week. It would have been incremental change over a period of 2 to 3 years. So it wasn't obvious because I was comparing myself to yesterday. If I was comparing myself at all, which by the way I wasn't. So signs can be really obvious, but the most obvious signs in the world can be impossible to find if you're not looking, if you're refusing to have a look. So drinking in what? Not in a destructive way. Drinking as a need rather than drinking as a choice. Right. That was a sign. Other huge clanging bell that I managed to totally ignore was routine insomnia. So my wife goes to sleep really easily, always has done, like she's been tranquilized with an elephant gun. So her head hits the pillow, she's asleep 5 seconds later. It's really annoying, but good for her. And I would read my book 1, 2, or 3 hours after she'd gone to sleep because I'd have to read long enough to be tired enough to be able to go to sleep. So I was trying to tire out my brain sufficiently so that sleep would come. So routinely not going to sleep until 2 a.m., even though I'd gone to bed at 11, and waking up 3 or 4 times a night anyway, 4 or 5 days a week. And 1 or 2 of those awakenings in the night, I'd be completely soaked in sweat. So like big night sweats, several times a week, if not several times a night. So sweaty, I'd have to towel myself off and then sleep on the towel because my bedclothes were soaking wet. And that passed for normal. Again, I didn't start off like that, but I ended up like that. And the change was so small in terms of frequency and severity and duration that I didn't notice them. And also I wasn't looking. Lots of signs like that.
How much do you feel the culture of the organization you were working in contributed down this path?
So I'd say it did, but I would not characterize it as being the antagonist or the villain of the story. And I wouldn't be so simplistic as to say, oh yeah, it's because we had a really toxic culture.
It could be an enabler, though. It doesn't need to be toxic. It could be just by inaction, it's demonstrating permission.
Which is a great angle for this because definitely an enabler. And the thing about an enabler is it encourages and enables you to exhibit certain behaviors, right? So I would say that I was culpable, it takes 2 to tango, and I definitely was at that dance. I used to hit my targets every year, right? So it was a record-breaking run of hitting targets. My team when I left, was the fastest growing, most profitable, most successful team in Europe. So much so that the other divisions would send me their salespeople to train in the way that we were doing it. And my relationship with my target had become very skewed, whereby 100% was no longer a success. Success lived in the extent to which I smashed the target. And smashed, I would use those words, smashed the target. It wasn't enough to just beat it. That was the minimum. I had to smash it. And as you can imagine, that took more and more effort and energy, physical and emotional, and it worked. So every time the company set me off to do something, I'd go and do it and then some, which enabled my financial contribution to fill holes in other areas. So the company would say, can you do more? And I grew very, very used to saying yes. I liked saying yes. I liked the affirmation that it gave me, the validation that when I was asked to deliver some new project or deliver against an extra financial target or get involved in marketing or stand up and be the poster boy at some new trade show that's not even in my market, I'd say yes and everybody would be pleased and I'd be pleased because they were pleased. And I kind of liked the challenge. And I thought, well, there's nothing I can't do. So I might as well just say yes to everything. And I was proved relentlessly right until I was proved relentlessly wrong by being off sick for 9 months. So I was totally complicit in that. I kind of liked it, kind of got off on it even. My ego loved it, loved this yes guy, James, that's impervious to stress outwardly. Inwardly, I'm self-medicating with alcohol and a bunch of other stuff just to cope. But outwardly, nobody knew that. I didn't let them see it. So if you're the alternate part of your question would be, perhaps not to put questions in the host's mouth, but it might be what signs could others have seen?
Sure.
And the answer, well, my dad sent me a text message once this all came out, basically saying sorry, like expressing remorse or perhaps even guilt that he hadn't been able to protect me or seen it coming or support me better to avoid all this coming to a head. And I'd said to him then, I'd say to him now, how could you? Firstly, because I didn't really know and I wasn't looking. Also, I'm bloody good at hiding it. Really, really convincing at projecting what I thought strength looked like. And I was really invested in everyone else believing it. And they were invested in believing it too. So we're all invested in believing the charade. So why would they pick under the cover of that? And even if they tried, I wouldn't let them. I would explain it away, brush it off, and would just display more of those characteristics that everybody liked. So it wasn't, yes, the culture was an enabler of that. They were very comfortable with me over-delivering all the time, and so was I. So why would we rock that boat?
So now you're on the other, I guess we're trying to get on the other side of this. I mean, now you're an advocate of this. Now you're trying to help people not get to where you got, basically.
Hmm.
How did you get to a point to rebuild yourself to a place where you don't feel like you're going to break down in a pub?
How do I?
How'd you get here? Because I mean, obviously, you got to a point where you had to completely break down and be off work for 9 months,
Hmm.
but now you're in a quite a different place. We wouldn't be able to have this conversation if you weren't as self-reflective, self-aware, and now being an advocate for mental health. What were some of the things you did to sort of rebuild yourself, I guess?
So it took a couple of pretty significant philosophical changes, if you like. I chose to do things differently. Firstly, it would have been kind of, in one way, the easier option would be not to change anything. So just rest sufficiently to be able to go back to work and do it again in largely the same way as I'd done it before. And that's where my comment of if I'd have done that, I'd have died came from. Bearing in mind, if I'd zoom back into the past again, into 2018, that I once slid down the wall in a boardroom thinking I was having a heart attack and I was going to actually die on the floor, and spent 5 hours in the emergency room finding out whether or not I'd had some kind of cardiac arrest, only to discover that I'd had none. There was no evidence, there was no physical evidence whatsoever of any kind of ailment. So the only possible explanation was that it was not physical but mental. But I wasn't prepared to entertain that idea then. So I explained it away as something else and totally ignored it. So that was strike one, 2018, May. Strike two, March 2019, massive 10-day burnout, leaving me. Well, the only reason I left work in the end, actually, Russell, having had this huge public burnout, was because 8 days later I'd lost the power of speech. And shortly before that, I'd lost the ability to read. which is quite hard to know how to navigate your to-do list if you can no longer read it. And that happened in the office because I was relentlessly just trying harder. So if I have a better to-do list, I'll figure this out by myself, which I thought was what was required here. Because I'm a tough, autonomous leader, therefore I ought to have all the answers and I ought to be able to self-solve. So what did I learn to do differently? Well, firstly, admitted that I was ill, said it out loud. Secondly, sought help, asked for help, which I wouldn't have done before. Thirdly, accepted it, as in ask for help and then accept the help. And I'm not sure they always live together. Asking for help but then not accepting it or not throwing yourself into it, I think is definitely a thing. And through that, I found a therapist that I could work with. And I hasten to add, there are many types of therapists, therapeutic approaches. There are many, many therapists. And just because you don't like the first one doesn't mean that therapies are not for you. It just means you haven't found your own therapist yet. So carry on looking, I'd say. But I found one for me and I learned to talk. And I don't mean regain the power of speech. That happened quite quickly. But I had never in my adult life, probably since being a teenager, really, I didn't know how to tell the truth about certain thoughts and feelings. I didn't have the vocabulary, definitely didn't have the courage, and I hadn't practiced. So learning to talk was hugely significant. And knowing what it was to be listened to, really, really listened to by somebody who doesn't interrupt you and doesn't offer unsolicited advice or solutions because you didn't ask for one. But they love you, so they want to offer and they want to solve. And if I was a boss and I did this millions of times. People came into my office with a problem, if they were upset or whatever, I'd want to solve it. I want to take it away for them. And that's what a lot of that happened in the beginning. So where are we? So I learned to talk, I learned to listen, I learned to ask for help, not just then, but again and again since then. It's okay to ask for help. It works much better if you accept the help that you've asked for than not. And the other thing I kind of realised, which was really incredible to me, might be obvious to others, I realised that I was never, in fact, alone. I just didn't know it. I thought that I was the only one that felt broken, alone, and embarrassed, that nobody would understand it. Only to discover that once I told the truth, if I thought somebody was asking an actual question, how are you really? And if I just told them that it wasn't a burden to them, that I wasn't wasting their time or boring them, wasn't a burden, it could be a gift. Because if I was all right telling the truth, it made it all right for them to tell the truth in return. So I had a huge amount of these conversations, many with people I'd known 10, 15, 20 years, completely redefined some of the parameters of the relationships that were important to me. I told the truth and they told me their truth. And I was like, oh, it's a revelation. I never knew that about you. And I go, I know, no, I didn't know that about you. And now here we are having a mutually beneficial, reciprocal, open conversation with somebody I've known for 25 years. Why did it take so long? So that openness was a revelation to me. And the idea that ties it all together is I never needed to do it by myself, but I thought that I did. And when I say it, yes, I do mean recovering from what was frankly a pretty shit time of my life that was horrible. But I never needed to do it by myself. I never needed to solve really any problems by myself. I don't know what it was in me that compelled me to think I had to be this like heroic lone wolf character where I was only ever good if I had come up with all the answers. Support doesn't mean solve. It just means support. It can just mean listen. It just mean sit there. Give your time, give your attention. Just be there to listen.
So now you're in a situation where you're speaking to others. You're going out having motivational talks with others to sort of fill those gaps for them to get their awareness around this situation and use you as a cautionary tale more than anything else. What have you been hearing from others when they come back to you going, this resonated with me, that resonated with me?
So the story ranges and it picks up on various things. So people Different parts of it resonate with different people, but the phrase that comes up over and over and over again, and I used to assume, Russell, that the people with whom it would resonate the most would be the people who most closely look like me. And I don't mean 6'1", 200 pounds, in reasonably good shape, father of two, that's white. I don't really mean that, although there is some of that. So it's just as many men than women, actually, that seem to come up. And it can't be a coincidence that very often they're in a managerial position. So they're looking after them, not just their own target, they're looking after a team target and some other humans. The thing that continues to kind of surprise me is the extent to which somebody comes up with like eyes wide open going, I can't believe it. It's like you've just told my story to me. Like, it's not just resonant points. It's that it all resonates. The entirety of the story, like the commonalities, so many, they almost think that I've got into their head and are just describing their life to them. The interesting thing about that is they pick up on the bits that resonate and they ignore the rest. So it's not like it's true, not exactly the same as them, but there's so much of it, they can't believe it. The other thing that comes up a lot, particularly if I'm doing it face-to-face, mostly in hybrid and Zoom anyway, but it doesn't matter. The thing that's most amazing is when we get to the Q&A, and it's when people, they're not even asking questions. It's the bit that I love the most, but it's dressed up as a question. And actually, they make statements, and the bits that I love is when the most senior people in the room, firstly, show up. Secondly, they'll usually say something like, if they're being super honest, they'd go, I didn't think this was really for me, and I only came because my head of people told me to, or head of HR or whatever. I only came to be polite. And in fact, I intended to leave halfway through. I didn't think it was for me. I knew it would be good for the team, but I didn't think it was for me. It's like this divide. Somehow there's this divide between the team and the management that means that they're not all the same human beings at heart. And that's why I think the resonance comes from, is people who run teams feel like they somehow are totally responsible for the success and well-being of each person that reports to them, to the exclusion of themselves. Like they're forgetting to look out for themselves. And then they realize that what that means for role modeling. So if they're not looking after themselves at all, or if they are, they're not displaying it, what does that say about the example that you're setting? And how are they supposed to follow it? Otherwise, we're in tokenism. Do what I say, not what I do. And that's not how humans learn. They learn from observation and by copying what they observe, copying what they see. So that's where culture is really interesting. Oh, but we have a great organizational culture here. We've even got some fantastic words that we print on the wall. But it doesn't work like that. Culture, organizational culture, is a verb that we observe and feel by actions that we display consciously or unconsciously. That's where culture lives. And I get all these senior managers, like the penny drops, and they're like, oh yeah, I now get it. I now get that, rather than labeling these times that I steal out of my calendar, labeling them private appointment, when actually what I'm doing is going for a run or walking my dog or taking my kids to sports practice or whatever. Why am I hiding that away? I should be proudly displaying that there are things I need to do in my day for me to operate at a high level sustainably. And some of those things aren't work. To your point earlier about work-life balance, is there such a thing? No, there's just life. There's balance within it. Work's part of life and life's part of work, particularly now, hybrid. How do you tell the difference? I'm talking to you in my kitchen, which I also do some work in, and a cook. So where's the overlap? Actually, I've got an office out the back too, which I would advocate, but my wife's in it. So she doesn't like to be interrupted.
All this leads perfectly into my last question, which is, what's one simple action people can do right now to improve those relationships at work?
And at risk of perhaps being even too simple, know in your heart that you're in charge of several things, and there's one big thing you're not in charge of. You are in charge of giving a shit about the people that you work with, up or down or sideways. You're in charge of whether you care about them or not. You're in charge of whether you inquire as to how they're doing. You're in charge of whether or not you listen to the answers. You're in charge of how much time and importance you give to how long those answers might take. You're in charge of all of those things. You're not in charge of the solution. It's not your job to provide it. There are specialists, professionals left and right that specialize in this stuff. So not only is it not your job to provide the solution to somebody who's in pain, it's inappropriate for you to try and do so. It's unethical. It's unsafe even for you to put yourself in that role. Just because you've watched a YouTube video on open heart surgery or on Discovery Channel doesn't qualify you to do it. So why would you have a go? Just because someone's in pain in front of you, you wouldn't get your knives out. And just because someone's in emotional pain in front of you and you want to solve it, doesn't mean you should. So let's just remember what we're in charge of and what we're not.
That is James Pickles. He's a mental health advocate and motivational speaker. He's the executive coach for James Pickles Coaching, helping his clients with, I'm going to pull this one again, clarity, conciseness, and confidence. Thank you very much, James, for being here.
Thanks, Russell. Good to do it.
And that is it. That is all for another episode of Relationships at Work, the leadership guide to creating a workplace we love, you love, I love. Isn't that the whole point? We want to create a place where everybody wants to go to every day to do their best work, to be productive, to feel valued. That's what this show is all about. I've actually transitioned the show not only into audio too. Everybody learns differently. So I was really excited to show a different side of the podcast, which is now also on YouTube. But for a lot of people, podcasts are both audio and video. So it was a real easy and natural transition to do a video version of the show. So if you haven't checked out Relationships at Work on YouTube, I highly encourage you to please do so. Just go over there, subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notified every time there's a new episode. I've also started branching out into Reels on Instagram and TikTok as well if you want to find us. I'm just trying to share this brilliant information for my guests to help all of us do better. And I'm trying to find different formats and ways of doing that so you find it as easily to consume as possible. Because you know what? We can't move the needle if we don't know how to do it and we don't know others' experiences and how they were successful. So that's what I'm trying to do. Thank you so much for being with me along that journey. Take care.